Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. I have a familiar face with me who's been here in the studio before, probably just a few weeks ago.
Just a few weeks ago.
Ray Watson with the Pokanokets talking about their issues with Brown University, the lands in Bristol. We did see this week that they reached an agreement. Now, we saw the release from Brown.
Yes.
And then there was a release from the Pokanokets wanting to just, again, point out some of the things you're going to be continuing to keep an eye on moving forward, because this is really sort of the first step.
Yes, absolutely. It's the first step in what we're hoping to be an honorable and genuine process to really develop a new relationship between Brown and the Pokanoket Tribe. So it's a good first step, but of course it's a first step, and there's many more to come.
So the first step, talk with folks. We've seen the pictures, we've seen the tribe going to Brown saying, this is our land. So how much is going back to the tribe?
Well, that's up for negotiation. The Pokanokets are willing to agree with Brown with the understanding that, yes, historically it is Pokanoket land. But of course, Brown University's been there for a little bit. The Bristol community's been there for a little bit. So they wanted to respect other people's relationships with the land as well. So this is a part of the negotiation that will be ongoing. In the actual agreement for the language, in the language for the agreement, it says that it will be significant, substantial, and appropriate. So, that's up for interpretation as to what that is. But we're, once again, moving forward in the manner that Brown is going to be honorable and respectful as this relationship progresses.
So what are we talking? How many sit-downs are there going to need to be in the coming weeks and months to be able to sort of go through the really fine print?
Sure. Well, the major sit-down, and the one that the Pokanokets are definitely interested in, and I just want to clarify, I'm not Pokanoket, I'm Narragansett, but we're in support, and they've kind of, the Sagamores pointed me to kind of be the de facto media point person. So the major one is the sit-down with the other tribes who have been making claims to the land, because that's really where, in the Pokanokets' opinion, most of the pushback from Brown has come from, and the Pokanokets have welcomed that, because the Pokanokets are very clear on what their history is and what the history of other tribes is. And I was just reading this morning a document that came over from the Massachusetts Archaeological Society, where it was literally saying that the term Wampanoag is not what King Philip or the Pokanokets would have referred to themselves to during the time period in the pre-colonial history. In fact, the term actually was a generic term that was being utilized for all of the eastern tribes that Philip was trying to rally against the Europeans at the time. So certain Narragansett bands would have been considered Wampanoags. It actually derives from the same term where you get Wabanaki, who are all the way up in Maine and Connecticut. So unless we're going to argue that the tribes all the way up in Maine have a right to the... And then it was also found that the term, like I said, as it was associated with the tribes who Philip was rallying, a lot of the tribes that have been contending that they have associations with it were tribes who decided to stay out of the King Philip's War. So now it opens up a can of worms whether they're actually Wampanoag. So in my opinion, I think that when untruthfulness has been told, the best thing to do is just be quiet, because when you open your mouth and start to try to hold on to it, well, here comes the truth, and now other things start to get affected as the truth comes out. So it's going to be very interesting as we move forward.
So as you said, this sit down with other tribes. I see my notes here because, again, the Pokanokets really wanted to clarify this. Everyone said, okay, there's an agreement. Everything must be hunky-dory now.
No, it's negotiation.
It's the first step. It's the very much first step. When do you anticipate the tribes coming together and sitting down to sort of hammer this out?
Sure. So we had our weekly fauna meeting today, which is the Federation of Aboriginal Nations of America, and the Pokanokets are one of the tribal nation members. The Sagamore's looking to get those letters out as soon as possible because he wants to get past all of this foolishness. Like I said, the history is very clear, and I think it's a great opportunity for all the cards to be laid on the table, and so we can get past this nonsense about whose land it is, because as you can see, Brown University would not be agreeing to anything with the Pokanokets unless there was some substantiation that this is actually their lands. In my opinion, the language that was used and the reason that they were taking the stance is because they built relationships with other tribes, and rightfully so, they have the right to do that. But it really comes down to what these other tribes have been saying and what the history is that they're referring to that either substantiates or negates the claims that they're making. So once again, the Pokanokets know very well who they are. They know very well the history that's associated with them. They know very well whose lands that is, and they welcome the opportunity to see what these other tribes have to offer in terms of the claims that they're making.
And I know we've talked about this, Ray, but just from the Pokanokets making the claim to this land, what's the ultimate goal for the usage of this land now that we've gotten to where we are right now?
So if you've had the opportunity to go down there at any time, you'll see as nice as it looks, the trees aren't very well kept, the space isn't, tidied up the way it should be. There was tons of trash down on the shoreline. We even found a few grave sites that have been desecrated. So the whole purpose, and this is what the Pokanokets put in their statement, was that is to preserve the lands because they're sacred to them, and to try to get them back to as pristine a state of being as possible when the lands were unlawfully transferred in the beginning. So it's nothing about development.
Yep.
It's nothing about taking or putting a casino on it. As I mentioned in the last one, we're not casino Indians. That's not the route we want to go. It's about respecting the land for the heritage that it has and the relationship that the Pokanokets have with it.
And finally here, you kind of made a little segue into this, the stewardship of the Preservation Trust.
Yes.
What is the Preservation Trust going to be?
So the preservation, everyone knows what a preservation trust is. What's very interesting about this, and this is why I think it really is going to be an international model. In our last conversation, we talked about the tribal trust that the tribes had created.
Mm-hmm.
But with the tribal trust, they're also able to charter other institutions, corporations, other trusts. So what the Pokanokets are going to do is once we get past this initial meeting and the cards are laid out and everyone has to say, okay, that's Pokanoket,
mm-hmm.
the Pokanokets are then going to charter the Preservation Trust. And it's fantastic because the whole goal is to allow tribal nations to get into a point of self-sufficiency. Because if you're a nation, then you should be taking care of your own business. You should be handling your own matters. You should be in charge of your own lands. So the Pokanoket Tribal Trust will be chartering a preservation trust. I'm not sure what the particular language or title of the trust will be. And then the Council for the Pokanokets will be appointing a board to oversee that trust. And they'll be making sure that the lands are protected, are preserved, are respected for how they're supposed to be. And of course, as was also mentioned in the release, the Pokanokets have and will continue to invite other tribes to come for the ceremonies they hold there. For certain events that are more social, they actually invite the general public to come on board. So in no means is it a sort of thing where this is ours and no one comes around, but at the same token, these are sacred lands. They should be respected as such and they should be treated as such.
So as we sit here, again, it was just a few weeks ago that we were talking about trying to make, again, get Brown to get to where we are right now.
Yes.
How are you feeling?
Well,
where we sit today?
It feels good to be vindicated, especially because the original conversation was that the Pokanokets aren't Indians. They were called the Pokanoket Group. Then after dealing with that, it was that they were super patriarchal and didn't respect women leadership. That was the second thing that we heard, which was interesting to me because I was like, wow, just a few weeks ago they weren't a tribe and now they're a patriarchal tribe. And now here we are just a few weeks later and an agreement's been signed. So I feel very vindicated. I feel very hopeful. I'm encouraged by the fact that Brown has taken this first step. My grandmother worked at Brown for 18 years, so it's good to see that the university that I have a personal relationship with is doing the right thing. And from a fauna perspective, we're saying, okay, look, we've been saying that these are the right ways that tribal nations should be dealing with governments and with institutions. Here's an example of what we've been talking about. And what better nation to start with than the ones who signed the first peace treaty with the English? It just, all the way around, I'm all smiles, but you know me, Kate, I'm about the business as well. So we smile for a little bit and then we get back to the business.
Get back to the business. How much of a role do you think that the Pokanokets, again, making the very public displays of, again, being on the land,
Mm-hmm.
inviting the press there,
Mm-hmm.
going up to Brown,
Mm-hmm.
saying this is our case.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that pressure on Brown made them ultimately realize that they were going to continue to have to, again, as you said, they had their rationales at the
Yes.
outset, but do you think the continued pressure was really what made this work in your favor?
Absolutely, because it wasn't something that could be brushed under the rug. It wasn't something that could just be ignored. And I actually said during the negotiations for the last meeting I was at, I said, gentlemen, I just don't understand what Brown's strategy is in this, because it seems like every step that they take, it comes back to bite them in the behind. and they look very colonial and paternalistic. And I said, and this must be very stressful for you gentlemen, having to come in here after every time something happens to then just renegotiate what we were originally saying. So definitely, and I want to say Katapatush, thank you very much to everyone who shared an article, who gave a call to Brown, who stopped up there to drop off some supplies, because what we really saw develop there was a community. We were embraced by Bristol, we were embraced by other people, we were embraced by the media. And that was so fantastic. And we didn't really see anyone from the media necessarily trying to take the Pokanoket side. We just saw them reporting on what was going on, and that's all the media should be doing. So I want to take my hats off to the media as well. I just shared an article today. Newsweek picked up the story. So there's a lot of attention that was paid to this, and I truly believe that it was a community effort that allowed this sort of situation to take place. And that's ultimately what it should be, because Indians are part of our community just like everyone else is. They should be respected and treated as such, but they should also be given the respect of understanding that we were the first folks here. We have a special relationship to this land, and that should be honored as well.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time. I know how busy you are, but we get the releases. They're complex sometimes. They can be, there's a lot going on, and you always come in and break it down in a way that viewers can understand. Again, they see the headlines, but that's why we want you in to make it, easy to understand, and we'll continue to talk moving forward,
Absolutely.
Ray. I appreciate it.
No problem,
Okay,
Kate.
we'll
Thank
talk
you.
soon.
Have a
Ray
great